It's amazing how we can all be in different states, different countries, different time zones, yet we can come together on a platform like this to discuss how we can be better animal rights activists and reach our goal, which is animal liberation. So just a big thank you to everyone who made it here. My name is Pete Ryman. I represent Animal Activism Mentorship, and I'll be here just to sort of help moderate. Tonight, like I said, it's going to be a nice fireside chat. We will be discussing sort of the broad range of what vystopia means. I'll go ahead and introduce that as our topic, and then I'll introduce our amazingly powerful special guest and interviewer. There will be some discussion followed by a Q&A at the end, so be sure to stick around for that and prepare any questions that you might have so you don't forget them. And remember, just like my mom said, the only bad question is the one that you don't ask. So ask away. We will be broadly covering the idea of vystopia. Many of you are already aware of this term. And if you're vegan, an animal rights activist, if you've ever seen the movie The Matrix, or you know what the term dystopia means, then you're already aware of what we're going to talk about. When you become aware and you take the red pill and you wake up to what is going on in this world, to what we've been paying for our entire lives, there is a burden to bear, right? There's a reason why the general public turns away when you try to do outreach or when you try to show them images of what happens to animals behind closed doors, right? Because they don't want to bear that burden. It's easier to remain willfully ignorant at times. Do we allow dystopia to manifest itself into something negative, like misanthropy, or is there a better way to deal? And can we perhaps even use it as fuel to better fight for the animals? That's what our guest and Australian-based psychologist, existential psychotherapist, best-selling author, speaker, and communication trainer, Clare Mann, will be discussing. Our interviewer, Michele Granberg, is a support team member with AAM, a hardworking animal rights activist, and a longtime follower of Clare's work. She actually hosted a book study about dystopia many months ago, and we will be, I'll get right into it. Without further ado, I will let Clare and Michele get right into it. Hang around until the end to the Q&A, perhaps the part of the night that I'm most excited about. And they'll further introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they do. And we'll also cap the night off with a meditation led by Clare Mann. So I'll give it right away to Michele, please.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Pete. Great job. So I want to second Pete's welcome. Welcome everybody again to the Power of Action, Transmuting Vegan Anguish into Powerful Change Through Activism, presented by AAM. And I'm Michele Granberg. I'm moderating along with my co-moderator, Pete, tonight. I am a mentor and team member with Animal Activism Mentorship. I'm located in New Jersey, and I've been vegan and an activist for almost 5 years. So I'll tell you a bit about AAM. AAM's mission is to build a global community of powerful and effective activists in order to meet our ultimate goal of animal liberation. We do this by matching experienced activists as mentors with aspiring activists as mentees. Mentors meet one-on-one with mentees to share their experience and knowledge with newer activists so they don't feel alone and to inspire them to become more vocal and active for the animals. Additionally, we offer free workshops like this that train and educate our mentors, mentees, and the public on various aspects of veganism and animal rights activism. We're also proud to announce our strategic alliance with one of the oldest animal rights organizations in the world, Farmed Animal Rights Movement, or FARM. If you're interested after tonight in becoming a mentor or mentee, just want to get more involved, please reach out to any AAM mentor. Many of them are here in our audience. Please visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com, and follow both AAM and Farm on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Clubhouse. Okay, so very excited now to introduce our prestigious guest speaker. Clare Mann is an expert in the challenges of being vegan while living in a non-vegan world, because she herself personally experiences that as a vegan in the non-vegan world. And as Pete said, after Clare's presentation, we'll open up for Q&A, and Clare will wrap up with a guided meditation. All right, Clare, so why don't you start us off by telling us whatever you'd like to tell us about yourself and your journey.
Wow, and thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and it's wonderful to be amongst my tribe, and to be with other people that are prepared to be part of the solution. And I think that's one of the most powerful things we can do today. There's so many challenges in our world, and I think to be able to be part of that solution for all species is just extraordinary. So yes, well, I've been vegan 11 years, but my journey began over 40 years ago when I read a book by Bob Geldof called Is That It? Now, some of you may remember him. He was part of the Boomtown Rats, which I think was a British-based band. But you might sort of hear over the sort of Christmas period, if you go into a shopping mall or whatever, you hear that song, And So This Is Christmas. And that was part of his initiative back in it would have been the early 80s, when there was a huge famine in Africa, and he brought together a lot of musicians to raise money to all the proceeds would go to there. But he wrote this book, and he talked about working in a slaughterhouse in Ireland when he was a young man. And I didn't see anything or hear anything, but as I'm telling you, I can still see what is happening to an individual cow. And I just couldn't believe it. I was about 17. Wow, how didn't I know this? And I was brought up like most people on, an omnivore diet, and that was what we meant to eat. And in that moment, I stopped eating meat. I just thought, I can't be part of this. And it was very difficult back then to be vegetarian. And I tell that beginning of that story because it took me a lot longer to become vegan. Now, was that because I just refused to listen? Back then, I actually became a vegan before I even knew what the word was, only 11 years ago. But, often think we've done enough. We've got these blinkers on. And so when we come across other people, I think, and we say, why won't they change? Why won't they open up? They're vegetarian, but they won't do this. It's not that they're necessarily deliberately knowing it and feeling it in their hearts and then ignoring it. It's almost like there's this psychic defenses, I call them, where people don't even entertain. It's not in their reality. It's like before Vystopia and after Dystopia. We realized that. So I went along with life and was always interested in what made people tick. So it was natural for me to say, go into psychology and studying, what was it about, try to make the plight of human beings better, particularly in what was known as the quality of working life at the time. Trained as an organizational psychologist, did a lot of that sort of thing, which sets me in good stead now, particularly with looking at things like team building and communication. But it was 11 years ago when I was living in New Zealand with my partner, Brendan, and I heard the howling of dogs and on a different farm. I didn't have a farm, but I had living on in the country and then a piece of land. And like all people that are prepared not to close the door to the child crying next door or the raised voices and think, gosh, should I intervene or shouldn't I? We decided to do something. And then we came across the horrors of pig dog hunting and dogs being taught to fight and that sort of thing. And that was my second bit of activism. I'll tell you about my first when I was 8 later on. And so what we did was to do what we thought. This was just a few bad apples, and we had all the dogs taken away, and we had them sort of protected by the authorities until the man cleaned up the prisoner's cells and took them all back. That didn't sit very well with us, because how could they do that, put these vulnerable animals in this position? But it made us look further. And the longer I came across the dairy industry and saw firsthand the babies being taken away, and it just, how don't we know this? And so when we came back to Australia, probably a year later, we started, my dear partner Brendan said, it can't just be New Zealand, this can't just be. And so he went and did his research, and he uncovered the lid on what everyone on this call knows about. the horror, the institutionalized and ubiquitous nature of animal use in our world. And he looked at the dairy industry and the testing industries and the rodeos and everything. And that day came when, very short after our return, and said, I'm sorry, we've got to sit down and watch this. This is really important. We need to make some decisions. And so we watched all those things, and all the whole family, including the dogs, became vegan on the spot. Didn't know it was vegan at the time. We just sort of said, we don't want to be part of it. And you know, if we have to live on French fries for the rest of our life, we will. The biggest hidden secret, which we can tell people, of course, is that when it's done well, a whole food plant-based diet is hands down, all the science is there and the common sense is that is the most healthful diet. So I think that's very important to sort of know. So us have that. So then I became an activist at the same time, I guess. I reached out to Animals Australia, which is our biggest animal protection group here. There were only 7 people there at the time. And they're now over 30 people, and farmers quake in their boots when they come into play. I had the absolute pleasure of reaching out and running some workshops and adding what I was able to do. And so I started doing rallies and speaking out, and I guess the rest is history. People said, oh, great, there's a psychologist out there. I don't want to talk to a non-vegan. So, and I guess the rest is history, Michele, in one sense. That's a very abridged version of my journey over many years, certainly my activism journey.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot more. You could probably write a separate book. So, but let's dive into the experience, the psychological experience, basically, of the vegan. What is unique about a vegan's anguish, so much so that you coined a term for it, that we needed a term for it, that it's so universal? And how can each of us as vegans and activists here in our audience recognize dystopia in ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I'm a telling witness to this. So when people say to me, gosh, you just nailed it. It just is absolutely perfect. This is exactly what I feel. How do you know what I'm feeling? I say, because I'm feeling it too. And it's not pathological. There's nothing wrong with us. In fact, there's something wrong with us if we find out about this and we don't do anything about it. That's more concerning. And I always keep that up my sleeve when I hear other psychologists or doctors say, you know, it's people's choice, and we know the laundry list of what people say. There is no excuse whatsoever, and no bad news in terms of the solution, in terms of what we've got. So as I began my activism, people reached out and said, well, my particular pain is really to do with what I know, and my family won't change, and they're otherwise good people, and what can I do? So I only want to see a vegan psychologist. So they would go to their doctor, and the person would go, oh, well, you've got social adjustment disorders. You've chosen this lifestyle, and everybody has a right to choose. And so, you know, you're not fitting into the family so well, or you have an eating disorder. Now, there are some vegans that have eating disorders, but it's not because they're not eating animals. Or the most concerning to me, Michele, was when a psychiatrist referred someone and said they had self-harming tendencies. They had such low self-esteem that they chose to watch slaughterhouse footage to punish themselves. And I think a very familiar feeling came up in me. And I would love to mention at some stage that 8-year-old bit of activism. A feeling comes up from within me, an absolute rage and injustice. And I'm sure people have experienced it themselves. And I thought, I have to do something. I have to use the power that I've got here to actually stop this pathological response to what is normal for someone who finds out about the horror of what's happening to animals. And so you can imagine some people were sent to me and they didn't know I was vegan, and they would say, well, you probably don't understand this, but that's before I started speaking out. And you can imagine the 16-year-old's delight when they go, well, actually, I do, and you know, I do hear what you're saying and I know about that. And so we needed a term. So, you know, what was the term going to be? And because I wanted to identify specifically what was different from normal in the sense of our crazy society, might I say, anxiety, depression, social adjustment, you know, loneliness, anger, obsessive thoughts, all the sort of things that are trying to deal with a crazy world, really, and adjust to that. What was different? And so I come across The Matrix, which is a very telling movie, not only around veganism, but a lot of things that happen in our world, is once we get that glimpse, we take a red tablet, it's as if the whole world's changed, isn't it? Everything's, what was okay yesterday is not okay now. We walk through a shopping mall, we don't see what we saw yesterday. We see the suffering of animals at every point. And so I remember the term dystopia, sort of imagine, it says it's imagined, but we look around what's happening in our world, we wonder if it is imagined, place of darkness, greed, selfishness, totalitarianism, cruelty. The opposite of that is a utopia, of course, an imagined place of love and joy, freedom, abundance, kindness, peace. And I realized I was sort of living in a vegan, I heard the term by then, dystopia. There was this world out there was colluding with the most horrific torture of sentient beings, and then glorifying it and saying, yeah, let's go out for dinner, or I love wearing this nice new coat or this new wool jumper, and they can't see it. It's almost like a trance. And so I played around with the words there, talked to a few close people to me, and came up with the word vystopia. It needed a V because that's, as we know, that's very powerful, and also a green association to do with, more the association to abundance and climate and environment and things. And it was called vystopia. So that's how it came about, Michele. I imagine people know the definition of vystopia. Is that something you'd like me to say?
Yes, I was just going to ask you that. Just in case there are a few folks who don't know the definition, it's really worth repeating.
Great. So vystopia, and I'll let me show this, which you mentioned, I've written a book on it. That's my office copy, Vystopia. So vystopia, the anguish of being vegan in a non-vegan world. And so vystopia is the deep anguish we feel when we find out about this systematized and industrialized cruelty towards animals. And then when we tell people, all of us have this illusion that when we tell people, they'll change immediately. We all go through that. And then we can't actually believe we've told people. And we come up with what I call a trance-like collusion with a dark and dystopian world they're not even aware they're in. They say there's nothing to worry about. The government would never allow it. Oh, that's just a few bad apples. Oh, there's humane ways to do it, the normal laundry list. But then we have this deeper anguish, really. We go, well, if I didn't know about over 3 billion, about 3.8 billion if we include, and we should, every crustacean and every fish and a fish person and every living sentient creature, we say, well, I didn't know about that used for us yearly. What else don't I know? And then we're called a conspiracy theorist. And so we have to live with this ridicule and, people poking fun at us, saying, don't tell me what to do, you're preachy. We could collectively write a book on those phrases. And so I call that vystopia. But it's particularly, the first part is very important, but often people forget the other little bits, really. The what else don't I know? And to keep taking that red tablet. So the anguish is really about the systematized and industrialized cruelty that is normalized, totally unnecessary, and justified. It's just recently I live out in the country in the Blue Mountains, about 3 hours from Sydney, Australia, and I captured a little tiny, captured on a photograph, a little tiny juvenile fox. And it's illegal in New South Wales to rehabilitate them or help them. They're seen as feral vermin, terrible word, vermin. And this poor little fella must have been so hungry, he came to the house and to the door, and he sort of was looking for food and there was nothing there. And I threw him some vegan kibble, I think, and he ran away, but then he came back. And so I started support feeding him and set up a camera and was able to capture this dear little thing. But I remember mentioning it to a neighbor. And they said, oh my gosh, you've got to stop feeding that animal. I mean, they ring XYZ. And as he's there protecting his own, little companion member of the family, his dog. And I said to him, so what is the difference? Now, this person could be would, take you to task if you in any way hurt the animal that was living on his sofa, versus this dear animal that he was prepared to starve. That is the level of the trance, I think, that it is normalized and justified, that we can kill the cockroach, but if somebody tries to squat a butterfly, that's not okay. And of course, all of us cringe at all of those, and it's not okay to do that, and we wouldn't dream of it. But it's that sort of anguish, which is, this unnecessary convenience, blindness, huge speciesism that comes in our superiority, which just comes down to two arguments. At the end of the day, we either believe in cruelty or we don't, and we believe in superiority or we don't. I always often end my conversations with people that haven't yet, they're not yet vegans, and explain that to them. That's really what we're debating here. So that gives you a little bit of the anguish, I guess, Michele.
Yeah, it explains it so well. And I'm just sitting here relating to all of that and remembering back, as I'm sure many of us are, when we all first became vegan, the experience of having our eyes opened and being awake is an experience like no other. And once you're awake, you can't go back to sleep. It's absolutely impossible. You can't unring a bell. So it's frightening and upsetting and depressing and traumatizing and isolating. And I know that that's what you were starting to see in your practice. So given that depth of the experience of that vegan anguish, that dystopia, what are some of the, I know there's many mindset tips for managing dystopia and all the symptoms of it, like burnout and compassion fatigue and other symptoms like anger and instability. So talk a little bit about how we can help ourselves, or when we need to reach out for help. When does a vegan need to not handle it themselves and reach out to someone like yourself?
Yeah, well, that's right. It's number one, I'm a great believer in putting routines and practices in place that you keep putting physical and emotional energy back into your physical bank, sort of thing, so to speak. If we keep giving out, we become depleted, we become burnt out. And the worst thing about burnout is disillusionment. Oh, anything I do won't make a difference. And the animals do not need us to be disillusioned. They need us to be their voice, to be hopeful, to work through that and take responsibility for putting back into our physical and emotional bank the credit that keeps us able to keep doing what we do. I remember listening to an interview by, some of you may know him, he became a vegan over 40 years ago, I believe, is Gary Francione. I think he works at Princeton University, and he really labeled what abolitionism was, versus the welfarism. And there's been, when people are outspoken, he's had a little bit of criticism. I definitely don't agree with everything he says. I don't like his criticism of different forms of activism. Or anything short of abolitionism. It is absolute welfarism. If we knew the one way, we'd all be doing it, wouldn't we? However, when he was on an interview, he said, I haven't taken a holiday in 40 years. And a lot of people were alarmed at that. But when you look more closely at his life, I don't know him personally, what he means is that every day he's putting resources back into himself. So he's attending to his diet. Imagine it's whole food, plant-based, which is the most healthful diet. There's no doubt about that. He's out, he has fresh air, he has exercise in his life, he has downtime, he has social support around him, and all of these are resourcing him. He doesn't allow himself to get to a stage of burnout. The worst burnout I've seen is of people, they feel so guilty when they're not doing activism, of someone who didn't actually take their clothes off or shoes off for a week. They would be out, setting up cameras in slaughterhouses and whatever, and they would come back, fall onto the bed, didn't take their boots off because they felt that if they had to quickly go out and pick up another rescuer or something, they would not be able to do it quickly enough. And so they totally burnt themselves out, as you can imagine. But all of us understand that anguish, don't we? Because we think, yeah, but that's an individual. There's never enough time. But the animals need us to be here today, tomorrow, next year, and in the next decades, if we're going to collect a peaceful group of people to collectively do this. And so there's those practical aspects. I personally have done yoga for 40 years. I don't go to classes and I don't do hours on end, but I have a practice that setting up things that are doable. So looking at things like exercise or meditation or downtime, what can you do regularly that becomes a habit? Now, a habit is a memory of the body. And so if I don't exercise with my yoga, with my mat, dogs always seem to want to come onto the mat, and everywhere they could sit anywhere else in the house, but they have to go on the mat, so you have to work around them. Most people know this. But I thought, well, what I can do is 5 to 10 minutes 3 times a week. And I decided that 40 years ago. If I go a few days, my body starts to ache a little bit. I don't feel quite right. The memory in the body is telling me I need to do that. So that grounds me, it centers me, it enables a lot of stress to pass through the body. You can do it anywhere. It doesn't have to be hours on end, or we need to take weeks out at a time. Attending to diet, sleep is absolutely essential. But it's also, we've got to learn to change our self-talk. A lot of this is programmed, and perhaps we'll talk about it a little bit later. There's a lot of lessons from neuroscience we can learn of how things become hardwired. And I think Pete said it at the beginning, it's easy for our vystopia to transmute into negative things like misanthropy. We hate other people. And just that word hate is like torture or cruelty. It cortically has an effect on the brain and immediately rushes adrenaline and cortisol into our body. Just feeling those angry thoughts, which are understandable, but they have an effect on us. They lower our immune system, the research says, when we're angry, for instance, for the next 20 minutes after we've had an outburst. And so we are disadvantaged. So it doesn't mean we have to be sitting here as love and light. There's a lot to be angry about, and we need that fire in our bellies to make us do things, but we need to transmute it into the positive. So working on our self-talk, become aware of the thoughts you have. We all mumble under our breath sometimes when somebody said something, we raise our eyebrows and what you really want to say to someone. I might share some of those, my humanness later on. But it leaves us depleted. And is it helping the animals? When there's fighting and infighting amongst vegan groups because of our pain, is that we always have the criteria of the animal in the cage? Would they be happy with what we're doing? So how do we control that self-talk? And firstly, becoming aware of it, and then replacing that habit of negative thinking with something else. I'm a great advocate of meditation, and I know we're going to do one later, so I'll go more into that. But trying to just clear our minds, if you're a seasoned meditator, that's very possible to do as we retrain ourselves from our busy minds. But I like to use a little dose of neuroscience that says that we are more susceptible to change and breaking those thoughts and transmuting them into action and creating the physical and psychological, emotional conditions of which we can access solutions and be hopeful when we slow down our brainwaves. So I'll do that later, and I'll explain a little bit of that when we do the meditation. Social support, having good people around you. And Michele, I'll ask you this question in a moment. It's certainly my experience when we become vegan. I talk about this as a symptom of dystopia. Having fun, talking about things that aren't vegan, and particularly activism, we feel guilty. What a total waste of time. It all seems so trivial. Okay. And there's certainly a lot of things that I would now find trivial I didn't before, But however, we feel then guilty. But when people are around other activists, they can have a meal together. They can see a funny film or something, because it's almost like we've earned our stripes. We've done this. Now we can do this. But if it's just a general, shall I amuse myself, neighbor invites you around to do something, you think, actually, no, this is just pure entertainment. So there's some of the things, perhaps I'm giving a little bit, I can say more, Michele, but is that your experience of that, and what you find with your mentoring, that, individuals say, it's just so trivial, I don't want to waste time talking or doing these things, some of these things?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I can validate that 100% what you just said, that things seem more trivial, and that it's harder to have fun, to let ourselves have fun, and to engage in what seems like meaningless activities. We still do that, but it takes more effort. And I'm always aware that, gosh, right now I could be doing something for the animals. It's constant. It's 24/7, except for maybe the first 2 minutes when I wake up in the morning, when I've maybe forgotten we're living in this dystopia world. Then it starts immediately. And as soon as I turn on my computer, for all of us, I'm sure that's when we're bombarded with the video and the photographs, and even the good things that activists are doing still bring it home. So let's talk a little bit about the role of activism in relationship to how that helps us transmute our vegan anguish.
Absolutely. Well, it certainly was my personal experience. And then I did, quite large surveys to try and find out from other people, was it their experience? Is I just knew I had to do something. It was like, well, I've got to do something. First, from the fact that, and I smile when I say this now, but when, my partner and I became vegan, I had that moment of horror. What if we're the only people, other than the people who are actually behind the camera in the videos, that know this is going on? That's how much veganism wasn't talked about. Vegetarianism was, that was allowable. That was people just probably a bit fussy or allergic to cow's milk. Of course they're allergic, they're not baby calves. And I often use that when people go, oh, you're allergic. I said, oh yes, gosh, it's found out I wasn't a baby calf. Absolutely extraordinary. I think my parents lied to me. When we say it in this fun way, it can be. But I needed, wanted to do something, because every day, we may do other things, but the hours go on and on and on and on forever for those animals. It is what a writer once wrote in a book called Eternal Treblinka, which was a reference, of course, to a Holocaust situation. He called it an eternal Treblinka, and whether it's humans or animals or and I will talk about that, actually. That's a little bit later, the term Holocaust, because I recently found out that it originally was related to animals before we used it for some of the horrors we see perpetuated against humans. But we'll come back to that in a moment. That was a really big new thing for me. But when I think this is one thing is that we feel we're doing something. There's no doubt about it. So we feel we're part of the solution. But when I actually asked other people, they said, absolutely, it's the only thing that has assuaged my pain. And so we have to decide what is our best form of activism. I know there's debate over this. People say, gosh, you've done the most important thing. You've become vegan. You're doing everything you can not to finance those industries. And I know there's other writers, like my dear friends at Vegan Couple, who say, no, that's the minimum you can do. Now, it doesn't mean we're all doing undercover footage. Doesn't mean we're all doing vigils or street outreach. We have to find something, whether it's wearing a T-shirt every day and being prepared to talk, is we have to be part of the solution. Because how else do we think this is going to happen? Although there are things that I think happen in what we call the collective unconscious, but that's by us doing things as well. So I think it keeps us close to the animals as well. It reminds us of the individuals involved, and they are all individuals. It stops any complacency of, well, because that's often the argument, isn't it? When we talk to non-vegans, it's, oh, the problem's too big. What would you do about those herd of animals? And we know that individual who looks us in the eye, their life is as precious as each and every one of us. Everyone's an individual, every starfish, every person. So becoming active is very important. I think it's to be close to animal suffering and speak out, for me, is a personal a thing that keeps me alive there. And it's a great talking point, of course, to non-vegans, because if they try and dupe us down the plant-based discussion, and then that's important too, maybe a way in. We've got to bring them back to the empathy for the suffering of other living beings. And so I think it can transmute that anguish into being part of the solution. But I sort of see it that sometimes we put our foot on the pedal and sometimes we take it off. So sometimes we are out there, we're doing a lot of outreach, we're at the slaughterhouse door, we're highlighting, I do a lot of animal experimentation to open up what's happening and reach people. And there was actually a free training I'll mention to you there that we've put together on how to talk about how an 18-year-old can talk about vivisection and things to a professor who is going to tell you that if you don't test on animals, you have to test on granny, and we can dispel all of those. So an 18-year-old would have the words to actually go back to the professor who tries to lord over them and say, you don't know what you're talking about. We'll talk about that a little later. Is often I will do things like that, or go to a vigil, or those sort of practices, but then I might take the foot off the gas but be sure that I'm having regular conversations, because they'll come up in everyday conversation, whether it's a shopkeeper or it's, people ring me about, you have those calls at the end of the day, people ringing you about a hearing aid or something, or they try and catch you at a certain time to sell you something. We can reach to those as well, our neighbors, our family. So we take the gas off to often, what seems often very difficult, those conversations, but we're doing something. We have the opportunity, actually, almost in every moment of the day. But sometimes we do the very challenging stuff, and we there literally saving animals or standing up to others, cruel practices. I think there's some things going on in New York at the moment as we speak. So that's been the only thing, Michele, that I've found that people are able to transmute that anguish, because to live with the burden of knowing is absolutely agonizing, and be faced by otherwise good people that do great things. You know, they might even be advocating for human causes or environmental, but they don't see this, and that's our anguish. So certainly my experience. So that's hands down the one way I would say to actually to transmute that into something positive, rather than allow it to debilitate us, to become depressed, anxious, and not wanting to be here, you know, suicidal. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the antidote. You know, if we say it in a general way, is to channel that anguish as energy, transmute it into energy, as power, harness it as power to get us up out of our chairs and out there and be visible in the world, making a difference for the animals. So I'm going to ask you just one final question before we open it up, before we open it up for everyone else to ask you questions, because I'm sure there are plenty, and that will continue to lead our discussion. But I really want to know, what is your vision for the future of the animal rights movement? Are you hopeful? Are you not hopeful? And can you give us some specifics, an exact date when we'll have a vegan world? Just kidding. Kidding, not kidding.
Absolutely, yes. Well, before I answer that question, let me just say to you, there's actually a friend of mine, a Jehovah's Witness knocked at the door, and they said, "We've got fantastic news for you." And she said, "Oh, fantastic, the whole world's gone vegan, have they?" And we can all relate to that. It's great answer when they come knocking, or anyone else does. But if we woke up tomorrow and, oh my gosh, the whole world has finally come to its senses, it's all vegan. You know, we all laugh, we all smile. You smiled as you were asking me for a date. In that moment, something is physiologically changed in your chemistry. Dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, hope, trust. We go, oh yes, that would be, we feel it for a moment because we vision that. And that's what I'm going to do when I do the meditation. We can teach our bodies emotionally what it feels like to live in a vegan world. And then we're able to access the solutions, remain on top of our game, rather than we actually go on Facebook or we go on Instagram and we see this video, oh no, there's something else, or, you know, more people are eating meat or whatever. And then adrenaline, cortisol, hopelessness, negative thoughts, all these, and we are not able to galvanize those resources. And thoughts are things. Okay, there's a huge amount of collective data that says not only does it affect our thoughts, create our own physiology and our physical being. You only have to think about chewing a lemon to go, oh my gosh. And if we're not chewing a lemon, but we can imagine it. If I asked you to actually start sucking on one, our body remembers what that was like. In the same way, when we vision that vegan world, we can change our physiology, and we're more able then to come up with creative solutions. So I remember a couple of years ago at the Animal Rights Conference in Washington, and Melanie Joy, a colleague of mine, was on just before me, and she said, "I'm sorry to say, we're probably not going to see a vegan world in our lifetime." And I saw the audience sort of slump. And Celeste Rowe, if you know him, had just done this lovely video with Jane Unchained, if you know her, a dear friend of mine, who where they're talking about, is it 2026, that's right, a vegan world. And they all went like, and I got up on the stage and I said, well, I'm sorry, Melanie, I actually have to disagree with you there. And I believe we will see a vegan world in our lifetime. And then Celeste and Jane sort of perked up, and other people do. And I said, that's not just because it makes us feel all warm and fuzzy, which it does. We've got to accept that actually most people follow. If you look at what's happening in our world at the moment, how many people aren't asking questions? They decide very quickly what they think is going on in the world, and then they polarize. And as vegans, we can be as guilty of that as anything. Oh, this is happening, or that's left, that's right, this is right, this is wrong, this is health, this is, and we stop looking. The fact is, the majority of people will be told what to do. We have in this country, we have yellow bins for recycling, for instance. And I always say to people, people put things in the yellow bin not because they're environmentalists, it's because that's what we do. And so we've got, I believe we will see a vegan world. We continue to work towards it through action and direct action. There will be people who will consciously and need to empathize with the suffering of animals, which really is what veganism is about. And they will be driven slightly mad, as activists are, by an injustice so big they have to act. That's why we're here. There'll be others that, oh, don't get me involved in that, but I don't want to be part of it. And it will align with my espoused values. They reduce their cognitive dissonance by aligning their feelings, thoughts, and actions. And then there's other people that look around and go, well, it's quite cool to be vegan and believing it's a plant-based diet. There's been a note of caution there, of course, is that people can slide back if they haven't done it from ethics, but people will follow. Some people, it's cool, it's organic, it's whatever. And we find this normal distribution in anything, whether it's adoption of mobile phones. There was those early innovators. That's who we are. We're that 2.5% of people who are, raising that awareness. And then it slips into the early innovators, the early adopters, which is about another 13.5%. Say mobile phones. People 25 years ago, a few people got on the bandwagon, others said, oh no, I don't want that infiltration in my life. Then it starts to really move once you reach that 16%. And another 30 odd percent will come in called the early majority, then another 30% the later majority. I can't remember for the life of me the second to last one, but the last one of the laggards is 7%. Now, in mobile phone terms, that's a 7%. That's Granny who says, if I don't get a phone, I can't talk to my grandson, but okay, I'll have an old phone. In other words, people follow. So we are the innovators moving into the early adopters, okay? And we have to play our role in this, and a lot of people will follow. They'll follow. Some will be for ethics, some will be for their own lifestyle, some because they want to keep up with the Joneses, and others because it's economically not viable to kill and eat the flesh and reproductive secretions of animals. But yes, I believe that's possible. However, we have to expand our view of veganism to include humans, because we're animals too, and that's really hard sometimes, because showing compassion for people that seemingly don't have any. And the reason is because the outer is the inner. The thoughts, the feelings, the actions, the words we put out into the world reflect everything that's happening in our world at the moment is fear or marginalization or polarization. And we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing in Australia, there's a lot of lockdown still. Neighbors, it's an Australian term, I don't know if it translates to America, dobbing people in. Hey, they were out of the house for too long. In other words, the outer becomes the inner. Okay, we have got to create a vision of the world of, a kind, peaceful, non-speciesist, one that does not agree and act with cruelty and does not agree and act with superiority. And we need to bring that into our world. So I see a lot of fighting in the vegan community. Well, don't give it energy. What people think of me is none of my business in one sense, and what they think of you isn't. And often it's their own pain. It's not an excuse to walk away from activism, I tell people. It's just people are operating from their pain, or they hate humans, and it is a normal process. Dislike the behavior vehemently, but the individual is someone that has got the blinkers on still. I'm sure that's an animal analogy, unfortunately, but they've got the veil down. So a vision of the world. Now, I am very interested in a dear colleague of mine called Derek Brose, who's actually set up a platform called the Conscious Resistance. And he's challenging the whole, they have been for many, many years. He's a vegan, and he works with another guy to set up the Conscious Resistance, which is how do we create a very different infrastructure economically and socially. They're not purely promulgating vegan values. He is the process of agorism. And I'm very interested in this. Agorism is a philosophy of the non-initiation of violence. Now, it makes sense, doesn't it? Is if a lot of people are, I don't want the non-initiation of violence, and that's against statism and institutions of government and oppression and, those sort of things. But if you see what an opportunity for vegans to expand that to all living creatures, because if that's your philosophy, agorism, you've just got to move it out because it's indefensible, it's out of alignment. Sometimes I think it's more difficult for vegans to expand it to humans than perhaps the other way around. I don't know, but if we all knew one way, we'd be doing it. So I see that we've got to create a vision of the world we want to create. We've got to act as if it's happening right now. And that means, how can we behave each day in a way that would be fitting for that world? And if we're angry towards other people, and we, preach at them and abuse them, and, we can be angry at the actions, but not hold the vision for the person, we are contributing to that thing called veganism, which is the non-initiation of violence, and the non-use and exploitation of all animals. So yes, I am hopeful. It's, if I thought everyone had to come through consciousness, Michele, I would not be as optimistic, but I think we need to hold the vision for others to slide into, for this to become normal. Because there was a time, I think in Japan, it was 1,000 years in their history, they were vegan. Back in our history, I don't know the actual dates there. That was normal then. What we've created is normal, certainly not normal to us and the animals.
I love that, Claire. Thank you so much, and for your words of wisdom and hope. I love that you say we are the innovators. I think we need to have t-shirts printed up that say we are the innovators. And you're right, just reminding us about all the big societal changes that have already happened within our lifetime. Just continues to remind us that this is just one more of those. So we're going to open it up right now for Q&A. I see a hand up. Keith, go ahead. And should we just go with Shreya first? Since I see Shreya's hand. Okay.
Yeah, we can go with Shreya first. And if you have a question, just raise your hand now, or if you don't feel like being on camera or talking, you can just put your question in the chat. That works as well.
Beautiful. Shreya, go ahead and unmute. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mann, for doing this. I always love hearing your words of wisdom. It just makes it sound so easy. And then we go out into I'm sure after this call, I'll go in and I'll go into a Whole Foods and I just want to, just wreak havoc there. It's no, gotta. So I guess it's good that I listened to this before I do go. But anyway, my question is with regards to the definition that we use for veganism, and and I think the word that has been left open to interpretation as far as practicable and possible. And what's practicable and possible for me might not be practicable and possible for, say, someone who lives in an area where food apartheid is an issue. So access to these healthy foods is an issue. Or, people, they're like, okay, we're vegan except for when we go to a family gathering, and, little things like that. So what works for one might not work for another. And while I see value in that it's showing that, hey, this is not restrictive, it's not a very difficult thing to do, does that also pose a risk of, quote unquote, diluting the message of saying, oh, it's okay to, not saying support because we're operating within a non-vegan world, but what does it look like if you're ascribing to the ethic at some point, but not at others? And I agree with, yes, that's plant-based, not vegan. So coming back into functioning in a non-vegan world or even a non-plant-based, is the goal to create a vegan world or a plant-based world, I guess, is my question when it comes to effective advocacy. I don't know if that was a question, but it was sort of all over the place, but I would appreciate your insight on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Shreya, I think I saw you on Clubhouse when I first met Pete. So
you did.
Nice to talk to you again.
We were all there that night.
Absolutely. So great to have you here. And, my answer to that question really is, we can't be half pregnant, can we? We're either vegan or we're not. And that word has been so misused. And however, people on their journey to veganism, often do a meat-free Monday. Are we all going to attack PETA and say they're doing terrible work? They've done amazing work, but for us, we need to be the light bearers, really. And, if you form this to anything else, like, beating your partner, oh, it's okay, I only beat my partner on Mondays, okay? But I'm actually doing very good and I'm always getting there. We would be horrified. Again, either we come down to cruelty and abuse or we don't. And so for the vegan, to actually say they're eating animals on other occasions, as somebody put in the chat, that's not doing everything you can to not use and exploit animals. Okay. However, it's really what that person, I guess, is looking for is a way. How do I navigate? How do I not be called preachy? How do I make these people think I'm a really normal person? I just happen to be vegan. And that's the path out of this. We do not help other people extend their compassion to other humans or to animals by actually saying, well, can you just reduce it a bit? Or no, you might sort of move them along that path, but ultimately you've got to do it with animal social justice, not, you know, their diet or their environment. I'll come back to that in a sec. But for us, we've got to be abolitionists. There's no doubt about it. Now, you know, in my home, for instance, there's one rug left in my home that I bought 30 years ago in Turkey. I live in England. That's where I come from. It's easy to pop over there for quicker things. Do I get rid of that? I'd definitely not buy one. I'd definitely not wear leather or wool or silk. But do I throw that carpet out? It will eventually go into the land, and I'll, you know, put it, you know, literally physically. But at the moment, I don't. I would never buy that, though. Absolutely not. So everyone has to make the choice along those sort of lines. And when we're advocating, you know, and people say, oh, I still got a leather handbag, so I use it. I would say that's not a good idea because people will say, oh, you see, she's got a, whereas this one rug in my house, it's not convenience. It's because I just actually don't want to buy something that is, you know, you're going to spend even more money on that, potentially in an area that, you know, would be abusing children in a sweatshop or something. You know, I perhaps need to look for other Hessian rugs. So we can't be half pregnant. And there's a speaker that came out a while ago. Just a reminder for me to reach out to him. Again, very contentious. Aren't we all contentious? We need to, you know, it's the message that if we find it contentious, really, rather than someone's in the person, called Orlando Torres. And he was working for Direct Action, very well known in that era, Direct Action everywhere. And he put a video out that said, why I am no longer vegan. Now that puts our back up, don't we? We say, well, you were never vegan. It's not, you can't go back. But he actually said, I don't call myself vegan. He got thousands of people coming forward, as you can imagine, tens of thousands. But he said, because the word veganism is so misinterpreted. If you ask the average person in the street, oh, it's one of those fussy vegetarians. And often if we tell people that we're vegan, you'll be a fussy vegetarian. And then we're talking about ethics and they're talking about, well, where do you get your protein and all this nonsense they ask. So he said, he never says he's vegan. If someone says, he says, I'm sorry, I can't eat that. I don't eat animals. And so that's how I reply when somebody asks me that. Because it's very different. If you say I'm vegan, oh, I think we have something like that. And we have gluten-free as well. On to the next topic. Okay. All my friends are vegetarian. If you say I don't eat animals, it's usually people, whoa, okay, well, I don't think there's any animals in this. We've got, you know, a cheese sling, whatever. And then it opens up the conversation to say that. So I personally choose not to eat in the presence of other people eating animals or products of animals, because it breaks my heart. You know, I want to cry. I want to, you know, I feel I'm letting animals down. There's no way. I just wouldn't want to do it. However, you know, will I go and have coffee with people in a cafe outside where I can see somebody in the corner having a cheese sandwich? Yes, I will. But saying to people, look, I'm more than happy to go to lunch with you. I'd love to do that. However, it has to be somewhere where they're, you know, not eating animals. Oh, okay, well, I think they do vegan options and say, well, it's actually not about my choices here. It's because I actually done a little bit of homework here and I find out what goes into this. And maybe not the time because we're just about to have lunch, but I'd love to have a chat with you, because if we're not informed, we can't make choices. It becomes a really reasonable conversation that puts animals right in the middle. I don't think we create a vegan world when we slip on our values, because really we're just trying to make it easier for ourselves. We don't make it easier for other people. We want them to be uncomfortable. We want to make them uncomfortable enough to change, their espoused values of being a reasonable, kind person that doesn't abuse others, that they need to align it with their actions and their thoughts and if we start sort of negotiating or shame them or blame them, they are actually able to get away with that because they shoot the messenger. You're the rude person. I don't have to listen to you. If we're a really reasonable person and we talk about these things and we just happen to be vegan and absolutely aligned in our values, they have to experience their disconnect. And that's one of the best things we can do. Whereas if we go, well, I've just eaten, you know, I know I shouldn't, but it was on the plate. And I've heard plant-based people say, well, if it's going to go to waste anyway, and, you know, I know there's egg in it. And I say, well, you know, oh, your girlfriend's not using her eggs. You know, why don't you just give those out to the public? Don't be ridiculous. We have a sanctity and a precious, a respect for our lives and other humans' lives. We need to give that to other animals as well. And they say, well, yeah, but they're not using their eggs. And say, well, I don't think your girlfriend is at the moment. And, you know, it's a bit provocative, but it gets people to really think about this. And they say, well, what happens in, you know, in sanctuaries and what? And they say, well, they usually give the eggs back to the animals, you know, because guess what? It's stealing. So has that answered the question, really? I don't think we could be a little bit pregnant, but how do we break through that so that we give other people the opportunity to step into their compassion?
Correct. Yeah, no, I think you addressed that very well. And yeah, my question was more overarching, and then you did definitely touch on that with how do we stick true to, hey, this is what veganism is, without diluting the morals and the ethics behind it, but also making sure it's inclusive. And that inclusivity does not mean you can be vegan before 6 o'clock. That's not called being vegan before a certain time. But what you can do is show how you can be vegan, show that how it can be accessible to whoever it is having an issue with that, and addressing what their concern is. So yeah, I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Perhaps I could just add to that. So, sorry, if you don't mind me just adding to that, you're absolutely right. We're holding that sort of vision. I almost lost the train. You just said something there. You know, we're not, right at the beginning, you said something, I touched on those sort of bigger issues. I've lost my train of thought. What a shame.
I think I said something about diluting the vegan message or the ethics without just
absolutely,
like, and then the inclusivity angle. Like, we want it to be based, but
absolutely, that's right.
But
yeah.
inclusivity.
Try not to lose it again. That's lovely. So, you know, I think meet people at the point. People come and they go, hey, oh my gosh, I'm actually eating vegan 3 times a week. It's if we rush into, yeah, but what about the other days? Champion people, that's absolutely fantastic. What is it that made you decide to do that? Okay, now because we're immediately going to get to the disconnect. Oh, I didn't sort of, or if they don't, and it's a plant-based healthy thing, great. But we've always got to get it back to the ethical issues, you know, whether they're interested in environment or health, or it's a done thing or whatever. I'm doing my best. I'm sort of incremental. I'm, you know, Aquarian or not Aquarian, pescatarian or something, all these words, you know, we can, but ask them what. Don't ask them, well, why are you doing that? If we ask why, they give a defensive response, okay, because we're used to it. It's like, oh, I'll give you the reason. If we say, what is it that makes you do that? You're getting them to experience that. And say, one person go, wow, I don't really like what happens to animals, but I'm so in my tradition. That's absolutely fantastic. Lovely. So what is it that, so you're saying that, you know, you feel strongly about the suffering of animals. How much do you know about the suffering of animals? You want them to experience that, so the disconnect becomes greater there, but you champion them for what they're doing. Oh, I'm doing meat-free Monday. Oh, what was it that made you decide to do that? Oh, well, you know, it's better for my health. And say, oh, it definitely is. You know, there's all the evidence is there. You answer their question, but then we must move it to the other thing. And often I sort of do it in a way that people think, I don't even know I'm vegan sometimes. I go, you know, that's fantastic. You know, I read the China study and gosh, hands down, they are, you know, eating animals or how not to die, it gives us categorical evidence that this is contributing to our ill health. But you know, when I looked into it, gosh, I was absolutely shocked about how these animals are kept. And I do it like a matter of fact, almost if I've just found out about it. And it's a great technique, isn't it, Shreya? Because you know, you're then this reasonable person, you just happen to be vegan, but they don't really know what vegan is at the moment. And then they go in and go, oh my God, that's terrible. It must be some really good, few bad apples. Do you know, there was a time when I believed that too. And then I did some work. Oh my gosh, you know, probably 98% of where our food comes from is animals that can't even move around their own cages. They take their babies. I mean, gosh, we're better than this, aren't we? You know, you're starting to make them feel uncomfortable, but they can't shoot the messenger. And so always bring it back to the ethics. It doesn't matter whether it's where do you get your protein or anything, just slip it in there.
Thank you, Shreya. Great question. Pete, do you want to go to the next question?
Yeah, thank you, Shreya, and Claire, for your answer. Your thoughts are infinitely insightful as always. I think we have only 2 questions, unless I saw one just pop up in the chat, but we have John Bell up next, and there's one in the chat from Angels for Animals. And we were going to attempt to wrap this up around 8:15 Eastern Standard, so that Claire has time for the meditation. So we're on point here. And let's go with John next.
Yes, hi, Claire. Can you hear me?
I certainly can. Hi, lovely to see you.
Okay, thank you. With so many issues that come up every day, probably at least 50 to 100 that you see popping up on your screen, and the activities that you as a group are involved in, how do you stay positive with doing what you think you is good, but it's obviously not enough to either yourself or maybe the people that you're involved with, that we're always challenging each other and you never feel like you're doing enough? How do you feel good about yourself through all that?
Yeah, no, important question there, absolutely. And I remember Gandhi once said, if you think something small can't make a difference, try going to bed with a mosquito tonight. Often we don't get to see the fruit of our works. I think a way I often keep positive is where we give out is not necessarily where it comes back. In fact, my mum told me that when I was a kid. She said, you know, where you give out love, Claire, is not necessarily where it comes back. And so really, we don't get immediate reinforcement. And I see it like this giant relay race. Is, you know, I believe that animal activism mentorship, there's some great work in Chicago to do with stopping Oscar de la Renta. Am I correct? In the right place with using fur. And what a wonderful example. But all those amazing activists that got it over the line with that very creative way to work with the subsidiary, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, of people that have been pushing for this since the 1970s and beyond. But many of them are not alive to even see the outcome of something like that. And so I see it like a big relay race, really, John, is, you know, we have to do our bit and we pass it to someone else. So a conversation or a chink of consciousness we give to someone who is asking about where to get your protein at the fruit shop, we don't know where that goes. Okay, and I certainly have. In the end, one of the stories in Vystopia is a wonderful example of just returning a product I did, and I'll say it very briefly because of our time. A product that was I bought, which I later found out had milk in it, and so I took it back, and the woman asked me why. I explained, and I said, well, I don't have literature with me, but can I bring some back? I normally do carry it, note to us all. And I took it back the next day, and I didn't think about it. And 3 years later, she bumped into me and she said, you don't know who I am, do you? And I said, no. She said, I was the lady in the health food store and you returned this. You gave me the literature, you told me about the baby calves, and I didn't think any more about it. I just did what we all do here. I gave a chink of consciousness. And she said, I went home, I looked at that and I was horrified. What happened? So I went to look at all the other stuff. She said, and I called my family in, she said, and we all looked at it and we were horrified. She said, you may know my son. She said, they run Gigi's restaurant, the most famous, most popular Italian restaurant in Sydney at the time, queues around the street. We all decided to go vegan and we would veganize our shop. It was in the paper, whatever. She said, and it all started with what you did. I said, I just did my little part. You took action. Now, John, that's an example of probably the one that I've seen the whole thing through. But I may never have heard that. Now, all of us here have to take those actions. And what keeps me positive is knowing that it's like this relay race. We are moving people towards that tipping point. And when we put that pebble in the water, you know, it moves beyond. I also work on the basis that there's a huge amount of research around there. If you go and look at the Maharishi studies or the intention studies, when people get themselves into a state, particularly with meditation, they slow the brain waves down and they vision the future we want to create. You find when originally Transcendental Meditation focused, 10,000 people were meditating on peace in certain areas like East New York or something. During the period they were meditating, they found that crime went down, lootings went down, reported carjackings and whatever for the period they were meditating, and then it went up again. Go and look at the intention studies and peacefulcities.org. These are fascinating studies that show that how we are can affect the whole world. So it's the actions absolutely essential, is the individuals we meet, the all of it is adding to this thing called consciousness. But we also have to do the inner. So being positive is knowing that what we think and feel and our intention for the world in holding that is not just because it makes us feel more peaceful, although that is a big side effect, is we are contributing to this world. Does that answer the question a little bit, John?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So, and you're going to have ups and downs. We have days when, you know, we want to rant at the world, and that's okay. We can't just, you know, I don't follow the notion that we got these really healthy, fit sort of vegans just in case they criticize us. Well, we don't have to be, you know, we don't have to be. It's great if we do. We don't want to give them the excuse of, well, I wouldn't want to be, but that's our way. How do we talk about that to them? However, you know, this is an ethical issue. It's not about us saying it's going to be better for the human. But all these, and I think Ashriya asked the question, all of these abuses are interrelated. All abuse is wrong. We're moving towards that, but we don't have this hierarchy in everything we do. The rude word to the person who's racist or sexist or transphobic, and we attack them or something, that in itself is adding to this thing of the negativity. So, but you know, we're not superhuman at the same time. We're all works in progress. We get angry. There's a lot to be violated that we believe in, that is true, but don't stay there. Don't let it crush us. Keep moving towards, and realize there's a big army of us, John, and we're not on our own. A rising tide raises all boats.
Thank you.
Thank you for your activism.
And if we allow it to crush us, then we're no good for the fight for animal liberation, right? Thank you, John, for your question. And again, Claire, for the answer. Moving to the chat, I have 2 questions in here, and I'll just read it to you, Claire. What is a good way to talk to family that are generally good people and care about fellow humans, but can't understand how they harm animals and they don't want to change? And that question is from Angel for Animals.
Yeah. Hi, Angel. Love your name, Angel for Animals. Absolutely. If you ask the average vegan, what's your biggest problem? It's all my family. Otherwise, good people, and I just can't, you know, break through that. And you know, I do write about that specifically in Vystopia, because we are, you know, our family kind of know us before we know ourselves. They remember the time we tripped over the step when we were 3, and you know, we come to know ourselves through that crucible of the family. And there's all sorts of dynamics there, conscious and unconscious, and a little bit of, well, we've always done it like this, and don't tell me what to do. And we, you know, we seem to be able to get away with saying a lot of things to our family that we would never get away with our friends or out in public. You know, there's that kinship, I suppose. And, you know, some people don't have anything to do with their families. I know that, and come from terrible backgrounds. But however, you've got that whole context. And so, you know, when we're talking and we're outreach and we're talking to someone about what's going on, you know, they may resist or whatever, but they haven't got any history with us. When we start to talk to our family, that sort of raised eyebrow or the sigh or the crossed arms of your sister or something, and that immediately makes us speed up our words, because that's like a trigger to us of all the other times we've had fallouts about everything else. So we've got this sort of context within it. And a couple of things. This works particularly well with young vegans, where, you know, I've had it like teenagers says, I just can't get my mum to, you know, she's prepared to be plant-based when she's around me, but then she doesn't want to upset dad when she has meat with him and whatever. And a good way for a young person, I say, well, is your mum interested in, you know, does she want to be a good mum? Oh gosh, yeah, definitely. Does she think you got a good relationship? Absolutely. And hopefully for the majority of us, we have good enough parenting that people want to be good parents to us. I know we have the other end of the spectrum. And so I say, you can use that. And it's not in a manipulative way, but I say next time with mum and go, Mum, do you know, Mum, I'm so sad we're not as close as we were. What do you mean, darling? Of course we're close. Well, you just don't understand me. Yeah, of course I do. You can talk about anything. Well, Mum, you know, there's things that keep me awake at night. What I know about happens to animals. Oh no, don't start that, she says. And she cringes. She gives us an indication. She's much nearer to veganism than we realize. It's the indifferent ones that go, you know. She goes, oh no. And so that's all right, Mum. I understand. No, I don't want to see it. It's okay, but I really understand. No, actually, Mum, until you see what I suffer with and I devote my life to, you don't understand me. Yeah, but I can't. That's all right, Mum. And I'm just telling you, therefore I'm sad that our relationship's not as good as it was. Now, Mum is starting, you're affecting Mum with something that her pain. I mean, salespeople know this. What is the pain here? It's actually, oh my God, I want to be a good mom. And say to her, I'm not doing this. You move from, I'm not doing it to change you, you know, although we definitely do want to change people. Let's not pretend that. And that's our job, because to stop them contributing. But we're actually saying, Mum, I want to be close to you and I'm not as close. And Mum has a dilemma. And if that is an uncomfortable enough feeling, you've got a chance to show her. Don't just send, people do, because we think, and sometimes it works. You have to watch those videos with your mum, because it's very hard for us. You know, we turn on Dominion. Oh my gosh, I can't watch these things on my own. I have to watch it with someone else. You know, and so we're expecting a non-vegan who's suddenly going to have this, and you know, we've got to perhaps be there with them. So that's one way. Another way is, again, chinks of consciousness, is actually see a continuum of awareness from right at the end, I'll never change and I like abusing animals. Hopefully there's very few of those deliberately there. Other end is the ethical vegan, who is even extending that to humans. Our job is to move them along the continuum of awareness. So when they say they're doing a meat-free Monday, they've moved along. We got to move them somewhere else. And likewise with our family. Champion what they do is, oh, don't tell us what to do, you're so fussy. Ask the what, when, where, how. Don't ask why. Is what makes you say that? You're so preachy. What makes you say that? Well, you're always telling us what to do. And what do you think it is that makes me do that? Well, you're all, for goodness sake, you flipping vegans, you're awful. When did cruelty become something to laugh at, hey? And, you know, and they push you and say, okay, if you don't want to talk about it, it's fine. However, we are much better than this, you know, so that we're all in it together. They're not terrible people, so to speak. Their actions are, but it's rather than, and say, you know, we almost want to shout it. It's not about me, you know, it's about the animals. I don't need you to follow what I'm doing. I need you to stop abusing animals. You know, all the normal communication techniques are moving along the thing, but use your relationship with people. And we can, not just teenagers, use that as well. And we can hopefully, you know, we're focusing on, you know, hey, guess what, Mum? We can have all the normal traditions. We can have Thanksgiving and we have Christmas and bar mitzvahs and whatever. We just need to change the ingredients slightly. I found 10,000 recipes, Mum, on One Green Planet. But you know, the good news, Mum, is no one has to suffer. Always bring it back to the activism.
I love that, Claire. Always bringing it back to the animals. Thank you, Angel. Thank you, Claire, for that question and answer. We're going to do one more question and close it out with meditation. This question comes from Yosi Perez, and she asks, I bought your audiobook. 3/4 into the audiobook, you started to give advice as if you had done outreach before. Where and when have you done outreach in your lifetime, other than with people that you know? You did talk a little bit about it in the beginning, though. Thank you, with a big heart.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And you too. So, yep, I've done a lot of, I used to, when I was able to, we are very much in a lockdown sort of environment here at the moment. It's going in a very dark direction in terms of the control of our governments, taking abuse of that situation, unfortunately. That's for another conversation. So I used to do a lot of cubes of truth. I used to do outreach where obviously you're showing people slaughterhouse footage. I've done a lot of speaking at rallies. So to do with particularly ban live export, the you know, keeping of pigs in farrowing crates, greyhound rescues, you know, a lot of outreach where we're on the street, we're showing people footage, we're there with a microphone, we're going to Parliament House, from ending trophy things coming into Australia. I've done lots of trainings, of course. My most latest really has been particularly working with animal experimentation, called xenotransplantation, Frankenstein type experiments that are happening in Australia and around the world, combining the cells of humans and animals to actually cure people, to grow new organs, to solve the problems that are caused by eating animals. We've been there monthly for 2 years, standing outside the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital, showing people what happens to animals, showing people that the utter political issue that is really to do, 94% of all animal experimentation does absolutely nothing in terms of yielding any benefit to humans. So a lot of all different sort of areas. So direct outreach, I've gone to vigils, I've been to the slaughterhouse, I haven't taken footage undercover, but I've certainly been to these places. So yeah, I am an activist, and it's very important, I think, that in wildlife rescues, kangaroos, of course, is another issue here in Australia. And all of us, you know, there's no competition here, is there? We all, when we do it for one animal, it's as if it was for another. Puppy mills, we've got a huge thing to do. There's been a huge expose in the Australian press at the moment with the commercial keeping of rabbits. You know, and it's so heavy in our hearts, hey? So thank you, and thank you for your activism. You know, I've been at this 11 years, and the size of our pain is often the size of what we do, whether in what capacity, whether we make cupcakes or whether we do something else, have to do something. Thank you.
Thank you again, Claire, for prioritizing us. A lot of people, you may not know this, it's very early in the morning. She made us her first priority of her morning. And to have you and your incredible mind on our side, it's empowering. We're all honored. And to have you on the side of the animals is reassuring. So thank you 1 million times, Claire. If you'd like to get right into the meditation, we'd love to follow along and learn from you.
Absolutely. Now, the good news is as well, is I've prepared a meditation that you'll be able to access. It's about 12 minutes long. And so you'll be able to practice this, and it's based on neuroscientific principles. Because when we're able to slow our breathing down and we slow our brain waves down from active beta waves, most of us, when we're in our waking hours, are beta, and we saw on a screen it would be moving quite quickly. And when we're really under pressure, it's going like this. When we're having a conversation with family, when we slow it down, and we know this in yoga and meditation, we move into alpha. That's when our intuition comes up. We're able to access that, and we're able to access. Also, we're more, we can self-hypnotize ourselves in many ways. So what I'm going to do, you'll be able to access that, and I'll give that to Michele. We can put that in the notes and things, but I want everyone to just close their eyes for a moment and notice how the world changes when you put your attention on the inside and just become aware of your breathing. We've only got a short time, so normally we would do this for longer, but I'll give you the gist of this so we can bring this and show how immediate this is. But you'll then be able to how to get a recording you can put on your phone and things. Just become aware of your breathing. It's probably very shallow. So just deepen that a moment. And just imagine your breathing coming up. Trace it in your mind's eye, up through the stomach, up through the chest, like a waterfall breathing out. So we're breathing in, it's coming up to a state of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, out through the mouth. Okay, breathing in. When we breathe out, we activate our parasympathetic nervous system that tries to bring us back into balance. Very important with what we know. We often live in a state of fight and flight with our sympathetic nervous systems. Keep breathing in and out. Only in the interest of time, and you'll have a chance with this with the other recording. Normally I would go through for you to trace in your mind's eye, put your attention on different parts of the body to actually bring relaxation into them. So we're going to do this in one little sweep, really. So breathing in, just allow. I'm going to include a little thing from HeartMath, the HeartMath Institute, which shows we have memory type cells in our heart. So as you're breathing in and breathing out, it's coming up through the body, out through the mouth. And then just with your attention, next time you breathe in, breathe up through the left-hand side of the body. That's actually coming through the heart on our left-hand side. And we breathe back in through the heart. We breathe up through the heart and back down through the heart. And then I want us to expand our awareness as we're now breathing up through the heart and down. This time it's almost coming out and coming in. So as we're breathing in, we're expanding, and then we're breathing out and we're contracting. As we breathe out, I want us to put that beautiful love heart energy out to another person or another animal or another being out there, and just extend our love to them. We're breathing out to them, and when we breathe in, we come back to the heart. You can actually look at HeartMath technology for over 20 years of research that shows changes happen in our physical heart before our thoughts and our memories. That's where our intuition comes from. Okay, and then just bring it up where we're coming up through the heart and down through the heart. You can check that out, the heartmathinstitute.org. So just now bring it up through the center of the body and out. Okay. And I want you to identify a feeling that you would like to uncreate, a typical one that comes in with your activism. You may be experiencing it now or you may not. Just keep the breathing going. And so it may be something like despair, anger, anxiety, depression, hopelessness. There'll be times when that is an emotion you wish to uncreate because your body memorizes it. And just imagine it in your mind's eye is almost taking it out from your body somehow and putting it outside yourself. So in your mind's eye, you're seeing it sort of, maybe it's a word, maybe it's some sort of image outside of yourself. And try to recognize that and almost the emotions that go with it, the tension in your body. Just become an observer. The emotion that you wish to uncreate, and it's got a label. The label itself reminds us of all the other times we've ever felt it. Many, and it's anxiety or hopelessness. Okay, just become aware, bring it out of your body and almost identify it there. And then just remember maybe some associations. You might see yourself doing outreach and your heart's dropping, thinking of going home for Thanksgiving or something. Those sort of things. So just see the associations, tension in your body, but see it outside of yourself. You identify, and I do this in a little more detail and direction in the meditation. See it there, but then come back to the breathing, breathing up through the body and down through the body. I've identified something we want to change. Okay. So now I want you to imagine, see where that is in your body, that feeling, that word. You put it outside of yourself, but what was that word? There'll be a little inkling that you recognize it when it begins to happen. Maybe it's a feeling in the chest or the throat, or it's a thought, but there'll be some physical sensation, if you can grasp that. Because what you want to do is when you're regularly meditating, slowing yourself down, identifying that, you want to remember when it started. For me, it's often a thing, a heaviness in the chest. Because when you're out later on today, or you're in the car, or you want to be able to recognize that start of something and actually use the word change. Okay, when you see it, you change. Okay, because you're trying to break the connection neurologically with all the little steps that get you to identify as this and feel the full-blown hopelessness or whatever. So try to identify it. And in the meditation, you'll be able to have access to. I'll do it with more detail. In other words, you're trying to get the center of it so that in your waking moments, when you feel it, instead of going down the storyline and creating all the physical and emotional conditions of hopelessness, and then you think, how do I drag myself out of this? You are starting to teach yourself in meditation to recognize the beginning of that emotion and remind yourself that when you're in a waking state in the car or something on social media, you get an inkling and your heart drops, you go change. And then the reminder is the next stage in meditation we're going to move to, you'll be changing to something else. It is a vision of the future you want to create. So let's go there for a moment. Check in with the breathing. You're breathing in and breathing out. And if your attention goes to outside the room or your aching shoulder, just bring the awareness back. That is normal. Bring it back to the breathing. And I want you to vision a future, a vegan world. In your mind's eye, in your heart, in your body, imagine that vegan world now. It's not even discussed what people would even imagine eating animals or using them in any way. Imagine walking down the street, looking in shop windows, having a cup of coffee, not having to cringe because we know something contains animal products, sitting on a sofa, buying makeup, going to a party. None of these questions have to be asked because every attempt in our world's consciousness is underpinned by the non-use and non-exploitation of all living beings, including Mother Earth. How do you feel? How do you think? See yourself in your mind's eye laughing with friends, really all the delicious foods that we know we can eat right now, but everyone else is. It's not even an issue. You don't have to worry about the person next door who has got a dog from a designer studio, because all animals are free and they're companions to us. They keep their babies. They are not used and for exploitation in any way. We see them as families in the same way we have our own, and we see a kindness and awareness to each other. Keep your breathing coming in and out. The more you can visualize the reality of the future we want to create, that's the beginning. And then I want you to do something really important. I want you to teach your body emotionally what it feels like to be there, because your body has memory of joy, freedom, peace, hope. And you have to go to an animal rights conference to be with other colleagues and friends and to know this is my tribe. Feel that feeling in your body. Because when you're out tomorrow and you're in the car or you're going back on social media, I know it's late for many of you, and or your family invite you to a barbecue and you know you want to change the menu there. As soon as you feel that little inkling, remember the more you identify it, you go change, and you change to resurrecting that experience of the emotion of the vegan world within you. You will influence with practice the thoughts, feelings, and actions associated with it. And you will physiologically, there'll be serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin. They create the conditions for you to access also the words to have the conversation with family, to remain hopeful. So just bring your awareness back into the breathing. And only in the interest of time are we doing this in a shortened way. But if you do this regularly, the formula is to close your eyes, come to the awareness. Connect with your breathing. We did a little heart math exercise to breathe up through the heart and expand it out. But visualize, breathe into the different parts of your body and relax them. What you're trying to do is marshal your thoughts and slow your brain waves from beta to alpha. You then identify an emotion you wish to uncreate. And without fading it or fixing it or judging it, become aware of it and try to externalize it in your mind's eye in some sort of way. Maybe it's a word on a piece of paper, or it's a dark color, or it's something, but embody it as a word, an emotion that you wish to uncreate and change in your body. And recognize, try to identify the little feelings that come from the tightness in the throat or the chest, and actually keep breathing into it and identifying, and remind yourself that when you're out in the real world and you get that little inkling, you use the word change. You're neurologically trying to change the trigger and replace it with a visualization you then move to in your meditation, which is a vision of the vegan world. And yet the more you see it and feel it and taste it and see yourself laughing with friends and your family bringing out this beautiful platter of food, it's not even a question. You know, we don't have to ask where things come from. But most importantly, in your meditation, you're teaching yourself emotionally and physically what it feels like to be in that future now. You, when you change in your everyday life and your everyday experience, you are moving into that. So you go with your outreach in that possibility. Yeah, there'll be ups and downs, but you're able to bring yourself back to there. So then just connect with your breathing again. Bring it back into the body, knowing that this is your point of power, your breathing. Breathing in and breathing out. A lot of us do what's called paradoxical breathing. We breathe in and our chest goes up. Really, it's our stomach that should go up. It takes a little bit of practice. Firstly, we practice this. When we're hurt by what we see or what we know, our sympathetic nervous system makes us take a sharp breath or lighten our breathing, ready in fight and flight. And it's sympathetic to the fact we are out of balance. It does whatever it does to say, get me out of there, fight, flight, or freeze. When we breathe out, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Our blood comes to the front of the brain. We can marshal our thoughts. And so I'm going to encourage you today to regularly meditate. I've prepared a short meditation, but you can do it in all sorts of ways and see your deep roots going into the earth. Resource yourself so that we can go out and continue to be the amazing voices for the animals that we need to be. We are part of the solution. We're the ones we've been waiting for. So just elect to do some form of meditation, envision that vegan world. Take a few more breaths. And when you're ready, bring yourself back into the room, holding that possibility of that vegan world. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bless you.
Thank you. A wood burning fire, a lot of dust. Gosh, I was almost asleep there myself.
Thank you so much. I know you mentioned that you're going to send me a link for the recorded version of the meditation that you just did. If you want to give it out loud right now, maybe Trey or Pete can put it in the chat. Is that just on your website, claremann.com?
Yeah.
No, it's veganpsychologist.com. Yeah, and it's under resources or services. I think resources, and you'll just see meditation there. You can actually go on to.
Okay, perfect. Very much.
Veganpsychologist.com. But if you look for Clare Mann, it'll all road goes back to veganism, because that's that's our solution of a better world. Hey, I'll give you a link later, because I don't know what it particularly is. It's probably /meditation or something.
Well, we'll get all of those in the chat. There you go, right now, so that you can find Dr. Clare Mann, Clare Mann on the internet, as we say. Thank you so much for covering so many wonderful broad topics tonight. It's really appreciated. I think we might have to have a part 2 to this and have you back on, because there's so much more to discuss. But thank you so much. So I'm gonna
absolute honor if I've added value today.
Thank you. And we really appreciate your time, and it shows us how dedicated you are to this movement to take the time out. And I want to thank my co-host Pete and Trey for working the strings behind the curtain, and then just give a announcement for a few more of our upcoming workshops that AAM is presenting. On Thursday, September 20th, we're doing an outreach workshop, also at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On Wednesday, October 6th, we're doing a workshop on satirical activism, why talking about dog meat works. So if that title intrigues you, you'll have to join us. Thursday, October 14th, we're doing a workshop on photography and video as activism. So how to take great, compelling photos and video. And on Thursday, October 21st, we're doing a workshop on disruptions. Another announcement is that on Saturday, October 2nd, it is actually World Day for Farm Animals. And this is a worldwide event where simultaneous activities will be taking place honoring farm animals and really remembering them and their lives and the billions and trillions of animals that are farm animals that are slaughtered every year. So you can contact us for more information. You'll see us posting about that event Saturday, October 2nd. And then again, if you're interested in becoming a mentor, a mentee, or just want to get more involved, please reach out to any AAM mentor or check out our website, animalactivismmentorship.com, and follow both AAM and Farm on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Clubhouse. So that's good. Pete, any final words before we go?
Well, thank you to everyone who is here. You let me sleep at night, knowing that we're not alone and we're all doing amazing work. Just keep going, but resource yourself, and I say, vision that world and actually act every day to make it happen. Thank you.
I'm so glad this was recorded and we can view it later, because there's so many layers to this. I'm going to watch this over and over again and learn something new each time. Everyone that showed up, thank you so much. Everyone stayed all the way through as well, as I can easily see why. And Claire, you said something there at the end. You said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. I believe that's what you said, right?
Yep, absolutely.
That's exactly it. That goes out to every one of you and all of us. Thank you all. And thank you, Claire. Hope to do part 2 with you.
Oh, lovely. We could do something perhaps on communication and specific strategies, particularly the family ones and the ones, when we're out on the streets and we know what the conversation is, or I saw something in the chat, someone who doesn't ask questions. How can we get that chink in there? And there's a way to do that without them shooting the messenger. So more than happy to do that. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.